It didn't work. The Depression got worse, thanks to increased central planning. FDR only succeeded in making the monetary system even less sound. Just after taking office, the president declared a 4-day nationwide bank holiday, absolving the bankrupt fractional reserve banks of any need to repay their depositors. But before the banks reopened, the Roosevelt administration had to come up with a scheme that would lead people to believe that new deposits would be safe. It created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to lull the public into a sense of security. In reality, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation holds just 0.5% of all the deposits it insures. But what people are counting on is that the Fed, as the lender of last resort, would step in and print whatever money would be necessary to prevent a massive bank run. By the mid-1930s, control of the Fed by the New York bankers was drawing to a close. The Morgan era ended when President Roosevelt, who was no friend of the Morgans, appointed Mariner Eccles as its governor. Eccles, a Republican from Utah, moved the activities of the Open Market Committee to Washington. President Roosevelt was on hand for the dedication of a new $3.5 million building to house the Fed.
I dedicate this building today to progress toward the ideal of an America in which every worker will be able to provide his family at all times with an ever-rising standard of American comfort.
1933 also marked the beginning of the end for the gold standard. There was no end to Roosevelt's appetite for spending on such New Deal programs as the gigantic $13 billion Tennessee Valley Authority, which flooded vast areas of productive farmland to provide government-subsidized electricity. The Works Progress Administration, which spent $11 billion on make-work jobs and pork-barrel public works. But the U.S. currency was tied to gold, which limited the amount of money the Fed could print to pay for these costly projects. So the government scrapped the gold standard for American citizens in 1933, and then Roosevelt confiscated the people's gold. As in World War I, the warring parties in the Second World War abandoned the gold standard to finance the war with central bank-generated inflation. After the war, there was an attempt to use the prestige of the gold standard to establish a global inflationary system. The world's financial leaders met at Bretton Woods in New Hampshire under the direction of the famous economist John Maynard Keynes. Their idea was to set up a new international monetary system that would have both gold and inflation.
Under this system, the U.S. dollar would be redeemable in gold, but only for foreign official institutions, central banks and foreign governments, at the rate of $35 per ounce. All other currencies would have fixed exchange rates with the U.S. dollar, and they would be redeemable in U.S. dollars.
The New York Times editorialist Henry Hazlitt was one of the first to realize that this semi-gold standard would not succeed.
Even from the very beginning, it was doomed to failure, and this very outstanding journalist at that time, Henry Hazlitt, predicted it wouldn't work, because he says the temptation will always be that the government will print more money because they will accept these dollars and they won't demand the gold and won't hold the government in check. And he was absolutely right.
During the 1960s, the U.S. government was trying to meet the cost of massive social welfare programs at home and the Vietnam War abroad. By printing more money, President Lyndon Johnson believed, the U.S. government could accomplish its goals without raising taxes, which may have caused a taxpayer revolt. In other words, it could have both guns and butter.
We will make sure that every dollar is spent with the thrift and with the common sense which recognizes how hard the taxpayer worked in order to earn it.
But the more money the U.S. printed, the more it eroded the value of the dollar. Nervous foreigners began redeeming their dollars in gold, as they were entitled to do under the Bretton Woods Agreement. After paying out billions in gold, the U.S. was left with $36 billion worth of outstanding debt to foreign creditors and gold reserves worth just $18 billion. Rather than stop the inflation, in 1971, President Richard Nixon refused to redeem any more dollars.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
It was the death knell for the Bretton Woods semi-gold standard and a triumph for the Federal Reserve. The dollar would no longer have even the illusion of a fixed value against other currencies. It would float against them, causing even more dislocation in foreign trade and massive uncertainties for businessmen. Worse, the final check on dollar creation disappeared, creating endless possibilities for inflation. It's running at more than 300% since 1971, thanks to the Fed's power to create money out of thin air and to insured deposits. No U.S. federal budget has been balanced since it abandoned the gold standard.
I don't think that that's something that enhances the efficiency of our economy. I believe that the best money is a market-determined money, okay, such as we had under the gold standard. In order to get back to a market-determined money, the Fed has to be abolished.
There is not now, nor has there ever been, any direct control over the Fed by the President or Congress. The meetings of the Federal Reserve Board are held in secret, and nobody knows exactly what goes on. If you watch the business report every night, commentators are constantly speculating about what the Fed might do.
All eyes were on Washington today as the Federal Reserve met to decide the future direction of interest rates.
Most economists expect the Fed to leave monetary policy unchanged.
It has spawned a whole industry of Fed watchers who try to second-guess the Fed.
The Federal Reserve has been surrounded by secrecy ever since its planning, its installation, and its operations to the present day. And the reason is because they can't tell the truth. If they told the truth, there'd be a revolution and there'd be a bunch of Americans, they're ready to all toss them out of the building.
A recent attempt to open the Fed to public scrutiny came in 1993. The head of the House Banking Committee, Representative Henry Gonzalez of Texas, called for an independent audit of the Fed's operations. He wanted the proceedings of the Open Market Committee videotaped, with detailed minutes released within a week instead of vague summaries issued several weeks later. Gonzalez also proposed that the president choose the 12 heads of the Fed's regional banks instead of powerful bankers. Predictably, Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan resisted the changes. What was surprising was President Bill Clinton's position. He declared the reforms would, quote, run the risk of undermining market confidence in the Fed. After the Mexican government inflated and devalued the peso in 1995, the Mexican economy went into a tailspin. Alan Greenspan lobbied Congress and the Clinton administration for a $52 billion bailout. As it turned out, the Fed's member banks held as much as $26 billion in Mexican debt. With no choice in the matter, American taxpayers and savers paid the bill.
The congressmen themselves, from my experience there, they're pretty naive and they don't understand it. The few that have to, like the chairman of the banking committee, is aware of this and goes along with it. And they continue to perpetuate this myth that the Federal Reserve brings about stability and they do good things for economic growth, even though they're the culprits. They're the ones who have caused all the problems. They're the ones who caused the recession.